As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, hey.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to jump right in because it's sickle cell disease and sickle cell awareness month, and there's so much that I want to kind of unpack and unveil and reveal, and we have so many folks on the line that can kind of help us with the cogent, informative, and really, if not strident, but sounding the alarm in a loving way, but also in a proactive way. I'm joined by my compatriots, Reverend Dr. Leroy O. Perry Jr., pastor of St. Stephen's AME Zion Church in Brantford and cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program, and my other compatriot, Reverend Elvin Clayton, pastor of the Walters Memorial AME Zion Church and cultural
ambassador. Good seeing you this morning.
Good seeing you, man. Cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program. My esteemed guest, are Dr. Brian Richard Smith. Dr. Smith, people really refer to your middle name that much, or it depends on.
I go by Brian or Hey You or a variety of.
Okay, and I won't ask you what your wife refers to, so we'll just let that slide. I like the Hey You though, but Dr. Brian Richard Smith, professor of laboratory medicine, of biomedical engineering, of medicine, hematology, and of pediatrics, and also deputy dean for the clinical and translational research, director of clinical immunology at laboratory, and the list goes on. He's joined by Dr. Cece Calhoun. Dr. Cece Calhoun, welcome. Good morning.
To see you all again.
She's assistant professor of medicine, hematology, and medical director of the Sickle Cell Program at the Smilo Cancer Center here in New Haven, at the New Haven Hospital System. Everybody, welcome. Good morning. Again, we're celebrating Sickle Cell Awareness Month, but we know it's a 24/7, 365 endeavor. And Dr. Calhoun, welcome back. And we're excited to have I think Dr. Smith, you've been on the show with us before, but as well. So you guys are fully baptized and ordained, and et cetera, et cetera. Let's jump in. Why does increasing awareness of sickle cell disease matter? Why does it matter? Dr. Smith and Dr. Calhoun, kind of share with us a little bit before we get into the actual details, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm happy to start. I have to say, I'm always thankful to be here, thankful for the opportunity to bring awareness. And it is a special treat for me to be here with Dr. Smith, who I consider a mentor. So this is really fun. I think, sickle cell disease is not something you can see by looking at a person. And so many of the patients that I care for often talk about how what they suffer through is silent, and invisible. And when we have an opportunity to bring awareness like we do in this platform, it really gives visibility and voice to all the patients that we care for, many of whom you may know. Like somebody in your life might be affected by sickle cell disease, and, the deleterious consequences like pain or sometimes even stroke. And so giving a space for people to be seen is so important.
Dr. Calhoun, as always, is incredibly articulate, and it's always a pleasure to be in the same room with her because she's a very wise and as well as caring physician. The one thing I would add to it, the other thing that's I think important from the awareness point of view, is that because one of the ways that one treats patients with sickle cell disease is by transfusions, it's helpful for everybody to know out there that donating blood is a critical part of helping to take care of these patients, and we may talk about that a little bit more later.
Yes, we will. Yes,
it kind of spreads out some of the issues that are out there, so that everybody who's healthy enough to donate actually can help to participate in the care of these folks.
Definitely, and we'll come back to that. And I know my compatriots have also been involved with the blood donation. But Dr. Smith, give us kind of the layperson's, laywomen's understanding of what is this disease and how does it impact our body? I know it's a challenging thing. This is not a grand round conversation, but give us a Reader's Digest version, if you would.
I'll keep it short and sweet. So sickle cell disease is a genetic disease. So it is something that you are born with. It is something that you inherit from your parents. You actually have to inherit a gene for the sickle cell disease from both your mom and your dad to do this. If you only inherit one gene for it, you have something that we call sickle cell trait, which actually doesn't have all of these complications, and is something that most people can walk around their entire life with without even realizing that that's the case. But when you get 2 doses of this particular gene, then it begins to get you into clinical difficulties. And Cece has just talked about a little bit about that. The fundamental thing that happens is there are these cells that circulate around your blood. They're called red blood cells because if you take them out or watch them spill on the ground, they're red, and they give the red color to blood that we're all well familiar with. And their major purpose in life is to carry oxygen from our lungs to all the areas of our body that need oxygen, and then pick up some of the waste products, particularly something called CO2, from those areas and bring them back to the lungs. And so when you inhale, you bring the oxygen in, it gets onto these red blood cells, it goes to where it needs to go, and then they pick up the other stuff, they come back up, and when you exhale, you get rid of the rest of this. And there's one particular molecule, one particular protein that lives inside these red cells. It happens to be called hemoglobin, and it is the primary protein that does all of this carrying around of the oxygen and the CO2, the good stuff and the bad stuff that your cells need and that they need to get rid of. The problem with sickle cell disease is that the genetic defect, the mutation, is part of this hemoglobin molecule that normally should do all this carrying around. When you have that in there and you have 2 doses of the gene, what happens is that when the red blood cells get into the very small blood vessels, the blood vessels that are actually doing the last delivery to the tissues, whether it's in your bone or your liver or various different places in your body, when it gets in there and the oxygen starts to get released, what happens when you have this mutation is that the molecule, instead of being nice and flexible and moving around wherever it needs to move around, gets stiff and it bends, and it makes the red blood cell itself bend and get stiff. And what happens is those cells then can get stuck in the blood vessel. And when they get stuck in the blood vessel, they stop the blood flow to the area that they're supposed to be going to. And then everything beyond that starts to die and gets ill, and because it needs the oxygen, it needs the blood to be able to get there. When that happens, the most common thing that when we think about on this is a painful crisis in sickle disease, which is really probably one of the most terrible parts of it. And it's because you now have areas of your bone and your muscle and all of those other things that aren't getting the right amount of oxygen. Okay, and so that leads to pain. There are a lot of other complications, all due to this same type of thing going on. And Dr. Calhoun mentioned one of them, stroke, which is a major complication and a major issue in sickle cell disease. And there's a variety of others as well. So that's the fundamental problem that's going on, and the fundamental problem that we need to try to reverse. Did I leave anything out, Dr. Calhoun?
No, I mean, that was great and thorough. So
Excellent, excellent. And Dr. Calhoun, just before I come to you, I wondered, Dr. Smith, you were talking just in your brief but really cogent and concise explanation. I could feel the passion. Tell me a little bit about this is the cornerstone of your work. I'm always intrigued with what kind of stimulates people to kind of be so dedicated and public servant. And so I'm just curious. This is a chance for your wife to feel good about you, for your daughters, et cetera. Let's hear a little bit about the why this has been so vital and integral to your personal career well-being.
Yeah. So no, sure. I'm happy to talk about that. I mean, to be honest, it kind of all starts, and this is often true, I think, for many of us who are physicians or nurses or in the healthcare field. It starts with a patient, right? And in my case, when I was actually an intern in early training, I had a patient who, unfortunately, she literally would spend well over a third of the year in the hospital. Sometimes it would be almost half the year. And she had that problem because she had sickle cell disease. She had bad complications from it and was constantly getting painful crises that she needed to come into the hospital to have those managed medically until she could get over that and then get back home again. And that was just very striking, obviously. And turns out, which I hadn't realized because it was a distant relative, I actually have a distant relative in the family who also has sickle cell disease, because sickle cell is predominantly in people from African origin, but actually also from some areas of Southern European. And I have part of my family's from Sicily, and it's actually in Sicily as well as in Africa. And so it just has meant a lot to me. I was very fortunate to have a very good friend in medical school who is both a researcher and a physician. And actually, he started out that way and knew that's what he wanted to do. Who was very devoted to his disease, again, because of family members of his as well, and got together with him early on, and we tried to do a variety of things research-wise in doing this, and it just, it got me hooked into something that really, at the time when I got started, I go back more than 40 years. I go back to the beginning of time. There was really very few things you could do for people with sickle cell disease, and it's just come along. For me, it's been a great thing to watch over the last many decades, because things have just changed so dramatically over time for the disease.
Indeed, and we're going to talk about treatments as well. And Dr. Calhoun, you see people and families, and often we think that the patient just being affected, but you see how the whole the family unit and extended family gestalt kind of is affected by sickle cell disease. And talk about how that impacts a person's life. And also, Dr. Smith alluded to the disproportionate impact on Black people, but kind of weave that in. But let's share a little bit about this path that you're walking from a clinical standpoint.
Yeah, and next year we'll have to bring a patient with us, because I think that's the most accurate source of that kind of journey. But doctors alluded to this, right? Being touched by a patient who spent a significant portion of their life in a hospital as a consequence of the disease. And I think that while we see a lot of patients who have more severe complications in the hospital, there are a lot of patients with sickle cell, even in Connecticut, who live every day managing their disease at home, managing their complications at home, and doing the best that they can to survive. And so whether that is pain that they can't go to work from, or I think about our kids who, with sickle cell disease, your ability to fight infections is sometimes compromised especially when you're young. And so if you're a parent and your child has sickle cell and they get a fever, that means that you have to stop what you're doing and make sure that they get access to the medications that they need. And if you have other kids, who's to say if you have appropriate childcare, or what if you can't take off of work that day? What if that's a choice that you have to make? And then for our young adults who, anybody who has ever worked with teenagers, they just want to be like their friends. Okay. And so, when you have sickle cell disease, which you can't see on the outside, but our patients are feeling these things, that compromises their ability to really thrive in the way that, that they want to. And so I think across the spectrum, we talked about debilitating pain, but as I mentioned earlier, there can be stroke, subtle cognitive challenges that come along with sickle cell. I say any place where blood goes, sickle cell can affect. So it could be the eyes, it can be the kidneys, anywhere. And so all of that means that somebody isn't able to thrive in the way that we know that they can. And a part of our job as healthcare professionals, as people who care for patients with sickle cell, who are looking for advances to help people with sickle cell disease, is to help them get to that thriving point. And I think that's what we've started to try to do in more recent years in the scientific community, as we think about different treatment approaches. And I think also, I would say more recently in the past decade or so, we're more conscious of the non-physiologic, the non-sickle cell related factors that impact how patients with sickle cell get care and how they live. And so when we think about sickle cell disease primarily affecting in the US, African Americans, Africans on the diaspora, because it's protective against malaria, we have to think about what is that context of being Black in America, or being a Black person experiencing healthcare, which is already tenuous, whether or not you have sickle cell. So all of those things are coming together as this big intersection. And so I think the opportunity for us as healthcare providers, but also as a community, right, is to support patients throughout this whole journey.
And we're going to elaborate on that kind of community, really showing the love to folks in a clinical way as well as an emotional way very, very soon during this call. But Reverend Clayton, I want to weave you in real quick about, I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you had a member of your congregation that you lost due to sickle cell, and certainly how that's impacted his family. And to use the word devastation might not be an exaggeration. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, that young man name was Wesley Delavan. He passed away at age 37 2 years ago. Wesley was a young preacher who was very, very active. And if you didn't know that he had sickle cell, you couldn't tell because he lived a relatively normal life. And then there were times when he would get sick, and sometimes he couldn't even get his medications. And then he would have to be hospitalized for a while and get a transfusion, and it would always bounce back. And this was a circle.
Mm-hmm.
Happened time and time again. And what CC was talking moments ago, they look normal, they act normal, and then all of a sudden they go through this episode, and then their body is wrapped with pain. It's almost, if you didn't know, you would think that it wasn't real. And I oftentimes I tell people when I get to heaven, I'm going to apologize to Wesley, because there are times I didn't believe that he was being truthful. Sometimes you think a person trying to get out of doing an assignment. And so not only did it had this effect on me, but it had an effect on his family. I remember his uncle would tell me when he was a little child, they would have to carry him, and pick him up at school and carry him and take him to get a treatment, because he started the day off pretty good, then the day would get rough as they go through. So this disease, it's silent, but it's also devastating and painful for the patients. And we just have to keep sharing the message about it so that more people become aware of what's necessary to help these patients.
And Dr. Calhoun, in a way, Reverend Clayton has passed the mic to you. But just before you grab the mic, I want to ask Reverend Perry any thoughts he has, and I'll come back to you about really some of the community initiatives and significant strides you're making in conjunction with the community, and then we'll kind of weave in the sickle cell disease clinic and what's up there, what's up with that as well. Reverend Perry, good morning. How you doing, man?
Good morning. How you doing?
Good.
It's almost like homecoming at an HBCU. What Reverend Clayton mentioned, I think is so germane, and I think it cuts to the heart of any of our diseases, is that family is so important and community is so important in the support and treatment of sickle cell. And, like our theme is we are family. So if it affects one member of the family, whatever the disease is, it affects all of us, in very emotional, sometimes in very stressful, sometimes economic ways. And I think when we look at it, we have to take that into consideration, even in treatment. It's not enough to give a patient a pill and say, go home and get well. It's just finding out if there are support people for them, if there's depression going on and other things, because that is so important. I mean, and particularly now when mental health is like off the chart and the rates are like just, more than we can even handle. Even as clergy, I don't think God is ready for the number of people who are emotionally put to the point where they want to just give up on life totally. We have to work together, I think, community and healthcare partners and families and members and community, really to come together to sit at the table and figure out best strategies, best practices going forward.
So CCU had definitely been passed the mic now. So chatting about weigh in about the success stories in the community, weave in
Yeah.
about the historic nature of the sickle cell disease clinic, and support you might be receiving and support you might need.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the like core pillars of our sickle cell program is community engagement. We always talk to patients that we may see them for an hour in clinic, but the other 23 hours of the day, the other days of the week, the other, weeks in the month, they are at home. They are living with people that care for them, that hopefully love them too, and that support them. And so our role is to really partner with the community and supporting the patients that we serve when they're not with us. And so I think, there are many ways that that happens. And I think there are many more ways in which I hope to see that flourish and bloom. I really want to highlight a couple of recent events that I
Please,
have
please.
had. Reverend Perry said it was like homecoming at a HBCU because Reverend Clayton and I just saw each other last week at a blood drive. Where, these two men of God, obviously setting example for all of us, donated blood to Dr. Smith's earlier point, which is absolutely critical in much of the care that we provide. When we run out of options, blood is what we go to. Okay. It is our, ace in the hole, but also our old faithful. So to donate blood is really important. And so that was a great community event. And then this past Saturday, Michelle's House, the Sickle Cell Disease Association of America, Southern Connecticut chapter, say that 5 times fast, had a wonderful walk here in East Rock Park to bring awareness. And it was so beautiful to see the community come out in support of sickle cell disease. And so I think we really got to think about outside of September, right? How do we think about supporting the people around us? For many of my patients, sometimes coming to the hospital is kind of traumatic experience, especially if they're associated with pain or negative things. And so being able to provide educational resources, being able to provide mental health support in a community setting driven by members of the community is so important for us as we think about moving forward. So I look forward to kind of growing and developing and that blossoming. I also don't want to forget about our children, again, with sickle cell disease, who are in schools and who may need special breaks, or some schools may not have school nurses, but how can we support them in their educational growth and development during such a critical time? The earlier you engage, the more that our children will flourish. And so thinking about the school setting as well. And of course, would be remiss without these two men of God, not to mention our church settings. And, I had really the pleasure February, Reverend Clayton, of coming to Reverend Clayton's church and talking to the congregation. And, my message wasn't specifically about sickle cell, but through that interaction, I was able to meet a couple of people and get them into care, able to engage with some of the members and doing some outreach and engagement. And so I really feel like the opportunities are endless. And we, in terms of the sickle cell program at Yale, we are but a partner. These community initiatives are going to be driven by the people that live in community, but we are here, willing and ready to partner as things move forward.
Excellent. But
Stacey,
let's
can I
jump
ask a
in.
question?
Go ahead. Mhm.
I had in Tarrytown, I had a young lady who had sickle cell. She was a high school student, and her parents ran a community CAP center. And so her father said to me one day, he said, she's going through so much mental torment. Her classmates don't understand when she's in pain. There's no support groups for her. And I noticed when you first started, you had a program that you were working with adolescents.
Yeah.
Does that kind of fit into the scenario of maybe one of the things we need to look at when dealing with adolescents and teens? Because they're on an island by themselves, just by age alone, and then put this on them, and then their classmates not understanding what sickle cell is, and thinking that this is inexplicable even to them. How do we deal with that?
Well, Dr. Smith knows this is my clinical and research interest. So he more than anybody on the call knows you just really threw me the alley-oop. So when we think about our young people with sickle cell diseases, they're going from pediatric to adult care is such a tenuous time. The data shows us that's when morbidity starts to rise. That's when utilization, like coming to the emergency department and getting admitted, that starts to rise. But when you talk to youth with sickle cell, their parents and their caregivers, it's so much more complex, right? They're trying to figure out how to manage their own care. They're trying to maybe learn to do the things that their parents used to do. How do I schedule appointments? Why do I take these medications? How do I do these things? Get that self-management, get that independence. And then they have to go from a different place, right? The pediatric clinic is different than the adult clinic. Being inpatient in the pediatric setting is different than being in the adult setting. And then that's just within the hospital, like they're trying to figure out, what do I want to be when I grow up? What can I be? Because I was told that sickle cell patients die in their 40s. So what can I be? What should I dream for? They're having to reckon with all these things, and their brain's still developing, okay, in all fairness. And so I always tell people, you look at me, you're like, oh, Dr. Calhoun, you're successful. But when I was 16, 17, 18, 19, maybe even 20, I made foolish decisions. And I don't have a chronic disease. And so it's, how do we support our young people through this transition process? And I feel like there's so much we can do in the healthcare system to do that. As we prepare them, as we kind of think about how we educate them, how we build those self-management skills, how we bring in the right players, how we as providers partner on pediatric and adult to make sure, even though the space has changed, that feeling is very seamless and smooth. All those things we can do in the healthcare system. But I do think, to your point, Reverend Perry, there's huge opportunities outside of the hospital, outside of the clinic, to help our young people, right? To get the education in a space from their peers, right? We have I have a really amazing med student that I work with who helped to start a near peer mentoring program that she's going to bring here to Yale, where it's undergrads mentoring kids with sickle cell disease. And it's mentorship, but it's also like partnership, like with somebody that can relate, that they can be free with, that they can talk to, as they're kind of navigating this challenging space as well. And so I think that there are many ways that we can think about using the evidence-based practices that we have, implementing them in our clinics very seamlessly and smoothly. But it's always going to be an opportunity for us to think about how we really surround and wrap around our young people with sickle cell to make sure that they feel confident. And, to be honest, like, one of the reasons I really love working with patients who have sickle cell is because the discoveries, the solutions we find for these kids, we can apply to so many other children. And so I feel like it's really a special space. I think in the same way that, there can be frustrations around treatment options and things, we find those solutions and then we use them to help, lots of people. So you definitely threw me the alley-oop with that one. I didn't know I was going to get that question. That wasn't on the list. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about that.
Well, Dr. Smith and Dr. Calhoun, elaborate a little bit more on as Reverend Perry has indicated, and you just kind of teased us, but give us some specifics in terms of, new treatment options, and people are hearing these words, stem cell research, and any hiccups in that regard, and even an overview of the treatment options. So let's spend 8 or 9 minutes on the treatment. This down and dirty medical, what you guys are being paid those big bucks for
8 or 9
for solving treatment options. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna let Dr. Smith talk about gene therapy. I'll cover the boring stuff though.
All right.
So maybe I'll add a comment at the end. But so I will say this,
boring if it works,
What'd you say?
Nothing is boring if it works.
That's true. That's the truth. So I will say, we've kind of known about the genetic aberration behind sickle cell disease, not kind of, for quite some time, maybe over a century, in fact. But really up until like 2017, we really only had one drug that was FDA approved for sickle cell, which was hydroxyurea. It's an oral pill. Most patients take up to 4 tabs a day. That tells the body, instead of it works in many ways. But one of the ways we know that it works in sickle cell disease is telling the body, the bone marrow specifically, where we make those red blood cells that Dr. Smith talked about, to make more something called fetal hemoglobin, the type of hemoglobin we made when we were a baby. And consequently, we're making less sickle cells. And so we've had that treatment, but that was the only treatment that we had. And I always say, like, especially now being here at Yale, working around such brilliant scientists, it's a shame. It's a discredit to science that we didn't have more options before then. in 2017, we got a couple of new medications, Endari or L-glutamine, which is an oral powder that patients can take 3 times a day that helps with sickling and some of the microenvironment around it. And then we also have another medication called Oxbryta, Rexelator, that kind of nuzzles in that hemoglobin Dr. Smith was talking about so that it doesn't kind of line up and make that abnormally shaped cell. And then we also have an infusion medication called crizanlizumab, which is more about pain and pain prevention. It kind of makes that environment in your blood vessel less primed for vaso-occlusion or things that cause pain. But really just still a handful. I only got 5 fingers. So, that's what I've only named 4 things. So truly a handful of treatment options. And really up until recently, before I passed the mic to Dr. Smith to talk about new and exciting things, the only cure for sickle cell disease was bone marrow transplant, because the bone marrow is the factory for all of the cells in our blood. And so if we're able to replace someone's bone marrow with someone who doesn't have sickle cell, which I'm making that sound super simple and it's not, then you can cure sickle cell. But it's a super fertile, exciting, amazing time for us as physicians and physician scientists who care for people with sickle cell disease because of gene therapy. So I feel like I've talked a lot. That's what I'm like,
Well, I'll gab for a minute or two then. Dr. Calhoun really outlined things very, very, very well, not surprisingly. If you think about it, there's sort of 2 ways to try to treat this. One is that you give, and CC went through a variety of the types of things we do now. One of those things is to give something that you take as a pill or maybe comes in intravenously or whatever, that prevents physically in various different ways these cells from getting either forming the stiff kind of cells that get stuck in the blood vessels, or makes it easier for them to get through the blood vessels. And again, if you go back to when I first started in this, literally all we had was we would give people a lot of fluid, a lot of intravenous fluid, which basically just kind of fills up your blood vessels a little bit, so it makes it a little bit easier for things to squeeze through. Not terribly effective. But there's been a variety of approaches that have been used to try to make that better, try to make the cells squeeze through. The other thing, and this is really where bone marrow transplant, as CC was talking about, and transfusion are kind of different aspects of the same concept of treatment, if you will. And what we did have dating back many years is the transfusion option for things. And how does that working? Well, basically, if you have sickle cell disease, then 100% of the blood that you have of all these red blood cells are the abnormal red blood cells, the ones that have this sickle hemoglobin in them that cause the cells to get stuck in the blood vessels and cause all of the complications. If you give a transfusion from somebody who doesn't have sickle cell disease, and it's actually okay if it's even sickle cell trait, because again, that behaves well. If you give a transfusion, you basically dilute out some of the sickle cells, and then there's fewer of them to get stuck in the blood vessels, and it makes it all move smoothly. Now, there's a variety of reasons that you can't just keep doing this to everybody, and it's difficult because you tend to eventually make antibodies against other people's red blood cells, and so you sometimes don't have the option to transfuse people for life, although some people do better with that, some people don't. And in the setting of stroke, for example, often we go to very intensive ways of treating people with transfusion. But the alternative to transfusion is instead of having to constantly try to give something foreign from somebody else into an individual who has sickle cell disease, is to make, as CC says, is to make the actual genetic problem go away in one way, shape, or form, right? And how could you? There's a variety of ways that you could think of doing it. The way, and I got involved in the beginning of a long time ago in what CC was saying about, talking about a minute ago. One way to do that is to literally replace all of that component of your body that makes these red blood cells. And that's the bone marrow. That's all the stuff inside your bone. That's where all the blood cells come from and come out from that. There are ways that you can destroy all of those cells, usually you can do it actually with radiation, but you can also do it with chemotherapy drugs and what have you. If you replace all of that and you take somebody else and then we can get into this immunology problem. But you take somebody else and give the bone marrow cells basically to that individual, okay, then you can grow up normal cells that will make the normal hemoglobin in there. And so that is an effective treatment. The problem with it is that that has a huge number of complications in and of itself. And the reason that it has those complications in general is because you are not, we all look different from each other, and our bodies recognize those differences, and that's what you're supposed to do. And you make a reaction against something foreign coming into your body. I mean, why do you do that? Well, you do that because this is how you recover from infections. If the flu comes in, you've got to be able to get rid of the flu. Well, your body needs to figure out that the flu isn't a normal part of you, and then it reacts against that. The problem is that if I'm sitting there and all of a sudden Dr. Calhoun donates her bone marrow to me, it can come into me, and I can look at that and say, well, I don't want that. She's not, and my body will make an immune reaction against it. It turns out that the way you make an immune reaction is actually also contained in the bone marrow, and it's cells in the bone marrow that do it. So if you do a bone marrow transplant, let's say we take and Dr. Calhoun donates bone marrow to me, I will try to make some antibodies against Dr. Calhoun. It turns out we can actually deal with that pretty well and prevent that. The real problem is Dr. Calhoun's bone marrow that comes in is going to look around and find out that's in a new place, and it's going to say, I belong here. I don't belong in Smith's body here. This is crazy. And that bone marrow will then make a reaction against me, and ultimately that can be fatal. And it even when it's not fatal, can give terrible reactions, big liver disease, skin problems, all kinds of things that can happen with it. And so, although it is a way of treating the disease, you have to very, very carefully choose the patients. You have to anticipate that there may be various complications. We've gotten better and better over the years at doing all of that, but it is not something that anybody undertakes lightly, right? Because it has all of these other complications to it. So what people have always known, I've known for 50 years or more, is that if you could just do something much simpler, it would seem, fix that gene, right? Take the abnormal gene and fix it somehow. Right? It's always amazing to me, this is the basic biology of this is absolutely amazing. We have about 20,000 genes or so. All of those genes make all the different proteins that we make. Turns out that they make all of these different proteins by just using the DNA, the genes, right, that are in there. And they're all these things we call them base pairs, or little molecules. They're all lined up in a particular order, and your body interprets all of that and makes the right thing at the end. It is literally one of those out of hundreds of thousands of them that's abnormal in sickle cell disease. It's literally just one. Turns out it's really hard to fix that one. And that's where the problem is. But that's all you really need to do. So one of the approaches to this is literally to go in and come up with a mechanism where you can fix that gene. You can take out the little bit part that's abnormal and stick in a part that's normal. Okay? And that has taken decades to try to figure out how to actually do that in people in a safe and effective way. And that's what we now have as one of the current treatments for it, is to do that. One of the nice things about sickle cell disease, as opposed to genes that might be in your nose or your arms or whatever, is that you can fix the genes by taking out some of that bone marrow, getting rid of the rest of the bone marrow, and fix it basically in the test tube, and then give it back to somebody. That's a lot easier than trying to fix a gene that may be all the way throughout your body. You only need to fix this gene in one place, and that's in the bone marrow. So that's literally what one does. And that is now a new treatment, very new, that we're still, I think, sorting through, and Dr. Calhoun can speak to this probably better than I can at this point, but that we're still sorting through exactly when it can be used, why it fails when it fails, why it succeeds when it succeeds. The other thing you can do, which is another approach, is essentially what Dr. Cohen was talking about before, which is it turns out that people with sickle cell disease and all of us actually are capable of making something that isn't the sickle hemoglobin. And that's this other thing, which is a type of hemoglobin you make when you're a fetus and right after you're born for about a year or so afterwards. And then it goes away. Your body just shuts it off. Okay. We don't totally understand how your body shuts it off and how that happens. But that is what, if you can just have somebody make more of that, they will do better. Dr. Calhoun talked about a drug called hydroxyurea, which is one of those things that pushes you to make more of that fetal hemoglobin. It generally doesn't push you enough to make enough of it to take care of everybody who has sickle cell disease by any means, but there are now better ways of doing that that also involve manipulating the gene. So all of that has really opened up a whole new hope in this disease, because ultimately that's what you want to fix. So you're not just constantly having to come back into the hospital, all the things that we have to do there. I don't know, Dr. Calhoun, do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, that was great. And I think I was loving it. Okay. Can you guys tell we really like hematology? Like, I just hope that is coming across, that we really enjoy our job. Yeah, I think Dr. Smith is totally right. Like, these new opportunities for gene therapy offer a promise of hope. There's certainly different considerations, but we're excited for what this means for people with sickle cell disease.
Stacey, I have a question. You were on a panel and you were talking about, is it Casgevy and
Casgevy.
Yeah. Is that what we're talking about now?
It is. So when Dr. Smith was saying basically how we can alter our stem cells or our parent cells of our red blood cell to continue to make more fetal hemoglobin, that was the last one that he was talking about, Casgevy. So there's like a certain sequence in our DNA that says stop making fetal hemoglobin, and Casgevy uses this technique, CRISPR-Cas9, which is why it's called Casgevy, to cut that part out so you make more fetal hemoglobin. So that's exactly what he was talking about.
And then you have to use chemotherapy, right, to get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
So in all of this process, how bad is the risk?
Yeah, so I feel like Mr. Ficklin's probably going to ask me that next.
No, I'm glad Reverend Perry's asked that. I don't like to be the bad guy all the time.
So, you are, and Dr. Smith alluded to this too, right? Because it's new, we're trying to figure out like who are the best candidates for this intervention or treatment. And everything that we do, we don't just do it. We have to think about the benefits versus the risk and make sure that the benefits outweigh the risk. Like, that's my responsibility to you as your doctor, like, to make sure that that's the case. And so when we think about both bone marrow transplant and gene therapy, Dr. Smith was saying earlier how, we have to manage our immune system, right? We have to tell the immune system, don't reject these new cells. And we have to tell those new cells, do not mess with this new person, this new host. And a lot of that we do through radiation and chemotherapy. And so, we think about chemo and other conditions like cancer and things like that. And we know that there can be risks, but we know the benefit is we're getting rid of the bad cells. And so with sickle cell disease, I think one of the things, especially around gene therapy, that we really have to think about is fertility, right? Because we want to be able to offer this treatment. Right now, it's FDA approved for patients who are 12 years old and up. In the future, I'm sure that it'll be approved for younger patients who, maybe are not even in their bodies and ready to have kids. And so we want to think about how do we preserve that function so that, again, our patients aren't just surviving, but they're thriving, right? Like, so we talked a little bit about this earlier. So we have to think about fertility. And then the type of chemo regimen that's used, it's very strong. It is one that we call it myeloablative. It means it ablates, just blasts out the bone marrow. We have to make room for those things, and we don't want any risk that the immune system will, compromise the process. And so you're at risk for infections during that time. Some of the medications that they use can affect certain organs like your liver in particular ways. And remember how earlier I said anywhere the blood goes, sickle cell can cause problems. That means that the older you are, the less ripe our organs are ready. I mean, listen, that's with or without sickle cell. My knees hurt sometimes in the morning, but as we age, but as we get older, like our body has more wear and tear on it. Those sickle cells may have had more wear and tear. So we got to think about, is somebody in a place where they can get this kind of chemo safely? How do we protect their fertility, and future life after they're cured from sickle cell, hopefully from this process? How do we protect them during that chemo process? How do we protect them even before then? How do we prepare them so that we can get their red blood cell parent cells, their stem cells, off in a way that's safe? How do we monitor them throughout that process? Because when we give you really intense chemo and you don't have an immune system, we become your immune system. So that means you got to come live in the hospital for a month, maybe longer, and even once you're done with that, how do we ensure that everything is taking hold and replicating like it should safely, and keep a good eye on patients who have gone through this? So, I think that we're able to talk about it briefly in this space, but when I talk to patients in clinic, I say, plan on a year. It's going to be like a year of your life, start to finish. You make this big investment, for long-term, outcomes and returns. So it's a lot of consideration.
Cece, would you say that the real issue is money and the low funding for research in this area? Because if we spent the same amount of money we do on other research projects, maybe we would be a little more advanced, maybe a lot more advanced in finding a cure.
I think how we deploy resources that include money is a reflection of society writ large, right? So, I think where the dollars are spent is reflective of like our societal values, institutional values and prejudices. And we know that there's racism in the world. We know that there are inequities in the world. And our healthcare system is made up humans that are in the world. And so we are trying to think about ways to unpack that and repack that in a way that's equitable, that's just, that's fair, right? So when I think about like treatment, the lack of treatment options or the lack of like research funding and priorities, recently that's changed a lot. People are recognizing like, yo, it kind of looks bad that we're a scientific community and we haven't invested in this population that we can, help, and so people are really turning that tide. So that's what I mean when I say it's a fertile time. But I think that historically comes from a reflection of society as a whole. We see that in every system we're in, and healthcare is an industry and a system as well. And so, for I think us as healthcare leaders being in that system, I really enjoy partnering with people who are really thinking like, how can we do this better? You all know that from your work with the cultural ambassadors in the COVID trials. You really saw how the disparities in care, and y'all stood up and said, hey, we need to get our community involved in these trials to make sure we're represented. I think it's that kind of advocacy, that kind of awareness, and that kind of action that helps us really start to chip away a lot of this historical inequity and racism that was present before. So for me, as I'm young, so I'm just telling you guys, okay, you don't have to tell me, I'm just taking it, for someone, even though I have a bunch of grace, for someone like me, who I feel is relatively young in the field, it makes me excited about the impact to have moving forward and what's going to come for the patients we see moving forward, not just with sickle cell disease, but across the board. Again, like hearkening back to the work that you all did with the cultural ambassadors and COVID, like it's not just sickle cell. We see this disparity and this inequity. It's across many diseases. So, but they are expensive. To your point,
we have about three more minutes. I was thinking that the three of you could take a minute for any closing comments or perspectives, and I'll jump in with my 30 seconds. Dr. Smith, I think, although I don't have sickle cell, I'm willing to take the risk of getting a blood transfusion or from Cece, because if I can get some of that black girl magic, I'm willing to take I'm willing to participate in that clinical trial. But Dr. Smith, kind of take a minute or so, 90 seconds on your closing comments, and then Reverend Clayton and Reverend Perry.
No, I'll just say I think we've heard remarkable stuff from remarkable people, all the folks on this call, and I think it's been a terrific show. I guess my last comment is just I think we're all very fortunate that we have people like Dr. Calhoun. You know, I'm old now, right? I've got more gray hair than most people out there. At least I have hair, which is good. You know, at least I appreciate that. But it really is the next generation that's coming along that's really pushing things forward with this. And I think that's true in all the aspects of healthcare and all the things that we do. So that's what I would just like to end up on is grateful that we have folks that are coming along in the next generations.
Excellent. Reverend Clayton?
Yes, thank you, Tom. Listening to Dr. Smith and Dr. Calhoun reminds me of something our Lord said. He have come that we might have life and have it more abundantly. And clinical research in this area is giving people a much better life. And I'm grateful for the work that they are doing and sharing with so many people.
Thank you, Reverend Perry. Just before Reverend Clayton, I guess I wanted to follow up. You received an award, correct me if I'm wrong, an award for your participation in blood transfusions. Tell me a little bit about that before we go to Reverend Perry.
It was a wonderful medallion, a service award. And I'm just grateful for that.
It was a service award for what was the reason that you're a stellar person? We know that. We know that you're in the Hall of Fame, but what was the award for?
Based upon our work with the Red Cross.
Okay, all right. You're a humble man. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Reverend Perry, you can take the other 30 seconds that Reverend Clayton didn't want.
I just want to thank CC for presenting to our exposure. Our young people who meet during the summer for the last 3-4 years. And I think it's so important that young people going into this field be aware of sickle cell and, you know, what this field is like, because it's not a field everybody wants to jump into. So, I mean, just the exposure alone, I think I'm very appreciative for that. And when I was at the blood drive, when I saw her come in the door, Tom, I was hesitant about giving blood, but after she gave me a hug, I said, I can do all things who strengthens me. So I was motivated, you know, to see a leader come in among everybody and, you know, give you a little pep up. That was awesome. That's all I needed.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you much. We're celebrating this month, but we're celebrating 24/7, 365 as well. Not only just survivors, but thrivers. So really, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.